welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. Today, I am honored to have one of my dear tech friends with me, Ivonne Yeste. And Yvonne and I go way back. We met at Dell Technologies. I was working for a partner, she was working for Dell. We both have a love affair for yoga and tech. I know it sounds weird, but these dualities exist in people. Okay. So, anyway, we became like instant friends. And I am so honored to have you on the show today, Yvonne. Thank you for coming on.
It's an honor for me to be here. Thank you so much, Becca, for the opportunity. And we did sync. And one of the fondest memories I ever have was that early morning yoga in the hotel room session where I taught you my yoga and you shared your yoga with me. And it was just so profound and so moving. And it created such an incredible connection. And look at where we are today. It's got to be what, 7 or 8 years later. So
Yes. Yeah,
it's
I have the
amazing. And
goosebumps as you say that. I'm like,
yeah,
that
I'm
was
same
so
thing.
magical, so
It
magical.
was amazing.
Well, before we get started, I just want to read your official bio so the guests get to know you a little bit, the listeners. So here we go. Yvonne is an award winning sales leader, entrepreneur, and student of life. She has been involved with technology since 1986 when she built her first computer. Impressive. She is a technology evangelist, enthusiastic about the channel, distribution, and most importantly, the customer. Yvonne is passionate about personal transformation and the ability to envision and manifest your best self every day. I cannot wait to get into this interview. So I'm just going to dive into the first
Let's do
question.
it.
So, Yvonne, what's your current backstory to where you are today? How did you get to be the Yvonne we are interviewing today?
The backstory, my life has changed so many times, Becca. I've reinvented myself back in the day, coming from being the first kid from my parents born in the US. They were immigrants. My dad was a political refugee from Cuba, and my mother was an immigrant from Argentina. So, growing up as kind of the first American kid finding my way, I got to have strange experiences in high school. And there were things that I would have never shared, but I'll do it here. I'm a high school dropout. But I always wanted to go to college, and high school was not a good fit for me for a lot of different reasons, but I got the opportunity after high school to decide, how am I gonna manifest the rest of my life? Because I always wanted to go to college, and when you get your GED, that really limits the opportunities
Mm,
that you have to look at four-year degree and going through that. So, started working full-time, going to school part-time at night, and then we're talking the mid-80s about that point. I had the opportunity because I was working as a secretary. They took my typewriter away and they put a PC on my desk, and I had no idea what to do with this. And then I find that the PC isn't working and they send me to their sister company because they have an IT guy there. So I asked him, "Can I watch you fix this? Can I watch you troubleshoot it?" And he said, "Sure." And he took the cover off of it. And I think I was expecting rainbows and unicorns or fairies to fly out because it was just magic. And he started explaining to me what he was doing, and it was logical and it made sense. So within 6 months, I built my own computer, and then I started building computers on the side as a side hustle and doing some technical support. And I thought, why am I working as an accounting clerk or as a secretary when this is so much more interesting? So
that's
6 months after
incredible.
that, I got my CNE back in the Nobel days. Yes, I am really that old. And then I got my MCSE, and I went from the office manager type role to a network manager. And this was kind of like my career path that led me to Dell, right? I became the network manager of a little office. And then from there, I became the network manager for a company that had regional offices. And then I became the IT director for a national company and then a global organization. So different steps along the way.
Sure.
And it manifested because it was fun and it was interesting, and I made the unconscious at that time decision to pursue that.
But I
Hmm,
think you bring up a really important part that I just want to kind of
hmm.
dive into for a second and then continue to go into your backstory is you said it was fun. And I think that as we talk about creating a work life that you absolutely love or one that thrives, fun is an important element. So do you want to talk about that for 2 seconds and then we'll
I
go
I
back into
do,
your
I
story?
I do. For me, The fun starts because I'm a very curious person. I always want to be learning and I want to be challenging myself. And I find that enjoyable. Yes, I am a complete nerd, but it is important that you like what you do, that you really like what you do, because then it isn't like it's work. It lifts your spirit, it fills your heart, and it makes you want to share that joy with other people that you meet. And that elevates you. So this is kind of a journey. As I share this with you, this is really the journey to Yvonne becoming a whole person and becoming her
Gotcha.
whole self. Because back in the day, you were a work professional and then you had your personal life, and the two didn't bleed together. And that led to a lot of problems for society and for us as individuals because you are your whole self all the time. And when you start creating these barriers, you start breaking yourself into pieces. And that's not healthy.
Mm-mm.
So going from that office manager type person to the IT person, now we're talking about in the 2000s. Around 2001, there was 9/11, and the company that I worked for was supporting IT systems for Central and Latin America from Miami. Well, the economy in Latin America collapsed, and so they had a layoff, and that was the first time I'd ever been laid off. And I was in shock. I was numb. I didn't have any idea how to process that. And
Mhm.
at
It
that
is tough
time,
for the first
yeah,
time.
it's tough, and I had to decide what direction did I really wanna go because I was having a really hard time finding an IT role at that time, and so was everybody else, right? It was the
Mhm.
dot-com bomb. Nobody was hiring IT people. So then it was like, "Well, what am I gonna do?" So I got an opportunity. It wasn't even something that I had searched for, really. I had a friend who was a recruiter, and he was talking to a client of his, and they wanted somebody to do IT sales, and I'd never done sales before, and I was terrified. I'd always had a salary, and then you get your year-end bonus, and life is good. But in sales, you have part of your compensation is at risk. But
Mhm.
when you haven't had a job in 9 months and you need to take a job, it was like, "Well, what do I have to lose? I'm not earning anything now. At least I can try this out." And that was the next reinvention. And it
I love
taught
that.
me when I was younger, I was a wallflower, right? I was very afraid to talk to people and I was just a real introvert. And I
I
still
can't even
am.
see that. I feel like
No,
it's a true story.
yeah, but I am an introvert because I recharge by looking
I
inward, yoga,
understand.
meditation, reading, doing things that
Mhm.
are more solitary. But I love talking to people. I love understanding the story. And that I got to capitalize on that when I moved into sales because sales isn't about convincing people to buy your stuff. Sales is talking to people and getting to understand who they are and what they need, and then how do you fulfill that need? How do you solve their business problem? How do you help to make them successful?
That's what I love about sales too. I've been a careered salesperson for 20 years now, and people ask me why I love sales. I said, because of people. If you think about your clients and the people that you work with, I mean, we've met some amazing people along the journey
Yes,
that I would have never met had I not chosen this as a profession.
100%. And so moving into that sales role, it was a new uncharted territory for me and I had a lot to learn. And the one thing that you have to overcome when you're in sales is any kind of fear of talking to people or standing in front of groups. The most important thing in sales, though, is you have to believe in what you're doing because people resonate with authenticity. So
Yes.
if you're talking about something that you don't believe in, they're going to know it at some gut level. They're going to know it. So many years doing consulting for IT and IT selling with a reseller brought me to Dell because there was a position in the territory and I had been supporting Dell as a service provider. So I moved into Dell working in the services team. And then when Dell acquired a company that had a channel, Dell magically had a channel. And that was uncharted territory. And I like the wild, wild west kind of thing where you make it up as you go along. So moved into the channel and then moved into distribution and became a leader on the distribution team, managing a really great team of people. And that's where I felt really at home because servant leadership it's the new buzzword, but it's always something that I resonated with. I always ask myself, what do I need out of a leader? And I need transparency, authenticity, honesty. I have to be able to talk to my leader and tell them where I feel like I might have a weakness without having that weakness turned around on me and
Yeah,
held
and used
against me.
against you. Mhm.
So that's what I wanted to offer the folks that were on my team.
So I'd like to go sideways again
Sure.
because when we were prepping before we hit record, we were talking about meaningful work and that we're in a really unique situation right now where we have multiple generations working in the environment and how that is changing the way that we work and live, right? It's
And
that
lead.
combo.
Yeah.
Yes, and lead. Yes. So can you talk about that? Your perspective was so refreshing and it
Yes.
like fired me up. I was like, yes.
So one of the things that really changed, and COVID helped to bring this out. I managed people that were all over the country and some in Canada even. And when COVID hit, we had to find a way to communicate, just like everybody else did, right? So we created this coffee talk in the morning where we had everybody talking for 30 minutes about nothing, right? It was about just stuff, water cooler chat. And we had the opportunity to get to know people in ways that we never would have because we would have never brought people from all over the country together daily to get to know each other. It would have been once a quarter or maybe a sales kickoff or something. What was really interesting about the team is you had me, my generation. So I'm going to say borderline boomer Gen X. Then we had millennials on the team, Gen Xers on the team, and everybody bringing a different perspective. And I developed a real admiration for the millennials and the Gen Xers because they have changed life in the work world for the better for people of my generation that were used to being servant, right? You're
Mm,
grateful for working overtime. You're grateful for the opportunity to take on stretch assignments and not get compensated for the additional work that you're doing because someday somebody's going to recognize your greatness and they're going to promote you or give you a raise. The millennials and the Gen Z, they have an intestinal fortitude that I have never seen before and that I am so grateful for because they demand, they're not asking, they are demanding that they have an opportunity to not just have work life balance, but have a life and have
mhm.
work that is meaningful to their personal values. And that's something that I believed in, but I didn't live it. And as a reality of having to work with 5 generations in the workplace, I got the opportunity to embrace and live my values. And I'm
I love that.
grateful for these younger people that insist that they have a life that is meaningful in every aspect. And that we talk a lot now about showing up as a whole person and being authentic and being who you are. Who started that? It wasn't the Gen X generation. It is the younger people that are demanding from big companies. Who would have told a large global company, no, I'm not going to do that? You are grateful for having a job in an organization like that. And now these young people who are so brave
I agree.
and are living their authentic selves are demanding that. And we're seeing the world make a lot of changes in many good ways about letting people be who they are and about not judging people for what they look like and about the part that's the most important to me, which is the story. You know, you mentioned that we get to hear the stories of our clients. We get to hear each other's story. And that's how we acknowledge and honor that we are all human beings, right? We are
Yes,
different ethnic backgrounds, different racial profiles, different genders, different everything. But at the end of the day, we're all human. And when you get to show up as who you are, that is when we get the opportunity to acknowledge that humanity in all of us. And that speaks to the yogi in me because part of yoga is namaste, people. Well, what does namaste really mean? The light in me honors the light that is in you because it is the same light that is in all of us. And now that thought process isn't something that you just share in a yoga class with a clique of people who show up that same way. It's something we get to share with everybody. And
it's
I
just
was
beautiful.
recently laid off from Dell, and that was an opportunity to take all the things that we are talking about and put them into reality and into lived experience. So I was let go from Dell on February 10th was my last day and 6,499 of my closest still friends were all let go on that same day. And there have been a couple of additional rounds of layoffs, and layoffs are all we hear on the news. You know, Amazon, 9,000 people, Facebook, 10,000 people. A lot of people are being impacted by this. And I mentioned grace earlier and how grace manifests. Getting laid off is something that has real consequences, right? Your income is cut off. Hopefully, you've gotten some kind of package for separation that's going to help you get through the next several months. And it's shocking. The first time I got laid off, I felt like I'd been hit in the head with a two by four.
Me too.
So I'm grateful that I have had that experience so that it informs this time around. But for anybody that's hearing this that has gone through a layoff, it's not an ending of something. It is the beginning of something. And you get to decide what that something is. You can take things that you always meant to do and do them now. Don't
I
wait.
I
So
love
things that I
that
had thought
so
about,
much.
yeah, so as a techie, every person that has technical engineering kind of side to them, they've got opinions on what's going on in technology about AI, machine learning, augmented reality, about cybersecurity, about everything. And I always wanted to share that. And I always thought, Yvonne on tech. I used to tweet on behalf of Dell. They ask their employees to be very active on social media. And so initially I used a handle that had Dell in it, and then they told us, well, we're going to change that. You need to do it under your own brand. So I thought, well, okay, Yvonne on tech, because Yvonne has opinions on tech. So I started tweeting under that handle. And I always meant to create a blog. I love writing and I love putting thoughts on paper and I love sharing stories with people. So I thought, well, now what else do I have to do besides the full time job of looking for a full time job? I'm going to go and create that brand and I'm going to manifest it. So, through the magic of LinkedIn at zero cost to me, I was able to create a newsletter so I could talk about the things that I think about technology and digital transformation and all of these things. And if I'm being truthful, which is important to me, then I will share that part of building that brand is a way of me looking for my next role because I did not listen to the advice that I was giving to my team members, which was you need to build your brand. You need to be on social media because that's how people find each other these days.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I
No,
just wanna
no,
pause because it's so important for the listeners who are full-time workers to embrace their personal brand. Like, who are
yes,
you outside of the company that you work for? There's meaningful work inside you, and there's a way that you can have your own voice and also represent the company that you work for. You can do both. It just lights me
absolutely.
up that you are, like, going down that path because I think so many people still feel that divide, that they can't embrace both, and the fact that you're leaning into it totally excites me, and that's why I just wanted to stop and talk about it for a second because listeners, build your brand. Lean into who you are while you work, and you don't know what doors it will open for you.
In that thought process, Becca, I will say you never made a secret that you were into yoga and that you have this very spiritual side to you. And that was part of your brand when you were with the partner when I met you. And then when
Yep.
you've moved into subsequent roles, you have always lived that very authentically and very openly. And it's landed you in a place where the company that you're working for embraces that and lets you do that and encourages you to do
Yes.
that. Folks that are listening, you need to be who you are. We talked a little bit before about the divide when you segment yourself internally into an intellectual body for work and a spiritual body for your spiritual life, whether that is religious or spiritual, it's still there. And into this emotional self, you have to bring yourself together and be a whole person all the time. And that's COVID taught us that because we became isolated from everybody else, and then we had to deal with the fact that we were in pieces inside of ourselves.
So I wanna ask you a question off of that.
Sure.
Why are you passionate? I mean, I could feel it. I wanna ask so we can go deeper with the listeners. Why are you
Yeah.
passionate about this topic?
I'm passionate about this topic because my goal as a human being is to connect with other people. I've got two great stepchildren that I treat like my children, and I call them my children, and they're wonderful people. I've got a good network of friends. So what's important for me is to have healthy relationships with my children, with their mother, who's my best friend, with other people in my circle. The only way to do that is to be who you are. And work is a big part of what we do. We spend more time at work than we do with our own families. You cannot not be your authentic self all day long. You have to bring that and you have to honor that what's inside you while you're doing the work. And you can combine your passions, whatever they are, crafting, sports, athleticism, bring that with you and then build that brand of who you are on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever the social media tools you like to use are. And younger people get that because they're those digital natives. Folks that are my age, the Gen X boomer, some of us work in technology and we embrace that technology. Some people are afraid of it. If we start talking to the younger folks that can help us out in an open way, we can embrace that too. But we have to use the tools that we are given to create that network. And creating that network is my passion. So apart from Yvonne on Tech, I have my retirement plan, right? When I retire, I'm going to teach yoga and I'm going to do life coaching. And well, guess what? Why do I need to wait to embrace that side,
Thank
right?
you,
So,
because that's exactly a piece of advice that I share all the time, especially
yeah,
with my coworkers and peers, I would say that are like north of 40, north of 45.
yeah.
I'm like, why are you waiting? Why?
Well, don't wait. Tomorrow might never get here, right? One of the
Thank
things we talk
you.
about in yoga is living in the moment because even though we plan, right? Humans plan for the future and we worry a lot about the future. The only time that we actually have is now, right? We
That's
live
right.
in the now. If we keep on looking backward to the past and develop attachments, another yoga thing, right? Don't want to attach yourself to stuff. If you live in the past, that's all you're going to have. But what you really have is right now, every single second is the moment that you are given. We have to figure out how we seize that moment. Yeah, you want to build for the future because if you're lucky, you're going to have one and it's going to get here. But why only wait until after you retire? We saw so many people lose their lives during COVID and post ish COVID. There's still things that get in your way. People get sick, stuff happens. Why do we wait to have a life?
Yeah, and you
You
might
gotta
not
live
ever get
that
it if
life
you
now.
wait, which is the whole
Right.
point you're
Well,
making, like,
and we'll go
do it
back to the
now.
millennials and the Gen Z. They know that because they've watched all this stuff happen in the world, right? They've watched their parents who have been attached to their jobs and identify so greatly in their jobs get laid off or lose a job and then lose themselves because they don't have an identity outside of that.
I have a big belief that one of the biggest problems we're facing right now, as far as how a lot of us grew up and how a lot of kids are still experiencing the relationship with their parents, isn't a lack of love, it's a lack of presence.
100%. And I'll share a brief story about that. When my kids were little, they're my stepchildren, as I said. So when they were little and grew up with their dad and their mom together, their dad worked for Dell and he was very passionate about what he did, but he was 100% invested in his career. And so he liked to take the big vacations and do wonderful things like that with the kids. And unfortunately, several years ago, he became ill and he passed away. And in talking to the children about their dad and about what they remember, they acknowledge those great vacations to Hawaii and all the cool things, but what they value, his son, my son, values that time that dad took him to the golf course where there was this big pile of dirt because they were doing something with his little Bob the Builder truck, and they sat and played Bob the Builder.
Wow.
And his daughter, my daughter, she values the time that he used to give her horsey-back rides on the lawn while they were waiting for the big brown truck because UPS would come and deliver stuff all the time. It's the time that you give your children, the time that you give your partner, that time you give your friends, and the time you give yourself, right? Because you need to have time for you. That's what matters. Everything else, vacations, all that stuff is great and it builds memories. But when you ask people what they remember about the people that they love, it isn't those great investments of financial resources, it's the time. And that's
It's
what
the
we
time.
need to share with each other because it's all that we have, right?
I love that
And
so much.
and that's the memories that become really important. So being present. And so shout out to your new book, the Burnout Workbook.
Woohoo!
As I started to read it, from the third page, it hit me in the face. You're talking about the time with your kids where
Mm,
you came home from work and you'd had a crappy day, and that crappy day was part of a crappy week, and you just didn't have the time to give them when they came to you.
yes,
And that broke your heart
it
later
did.
that
I can
same
still tear
day.
about it, and it's like 7,
Yeah,
8 years later.
yeah, and all they were asking you for was a little bit of time, and that
Yes,
time is really important. So we
yes,
have to make that time for each other, and that's what's changing in the workplace. It's
agreed.
what's changing in our society is that we're recognizing that.
So, as we wind down, I want to ask one more question, and then I want you to share with the listeners how we can find more Yvonne. How can what we've talked about today empower somebody else? We've kind of touched on it, but I always like the summary of like, how can what we're talking about empower our listeners?
I think our listeners need to be listeners. They need to listen, and they need to think about things that they resonated with from our conversation. We empower ourselves. There's no other takeaway from this discussion. It is that you have the power to create yourself. You have to take it. No one is going to give it to you. So if you're waiting for permission, don't, because you're not going to get it. You need to empower yourself, embrace your passion, embrace who you are, and then manifest it. And yeah, that sounds a lot like that yoga woo woo stuff, but it isn't. It's your life that we're talking about here. It's what you want to become, it's how you define success for yourself. You don't have to measure your life against anybody else's life. What is it that's going to make you happy? And actually, more importantly than that, what is it that's going to make you content? Right? Because the way that I look at it is, if I have a baseline of contentment, I'm going to have moments that are way up here that are
Sure.
joyous, right? And that's happy. But I'm also going to have crappy things like getting laid off that are going to happen down here. But I don't have to live down here. I'm not always going to get to live up here. But if I can find that happy medium and be content, then I have hit nirvana. I have manifested greatness in my life, because content means I am ready, right? When people talk about King David, and supposedly David had a ring made for himself, and he asked people that were wise in his kingdom to put something on this ring that would make sure that he stayed humble, that he wouldn't get caught up in the whole, "Hey, I am King David," and that he would never forget who he was. And the ring had engraved on it, "This too shall pass."
Aw,
Meaning that happy, happy moments, they're gonna go away. The really bad, crappy moments, those are gonna go away too. So if you find that baseline in the middle, you can stay in a constant emotional state of gratitude
I
and
love that.
contentment. And you can experience the happy moments and embrace them. And then you can get through the bad, crappy moments, because they're gonna pass, they're gonna go. But
That
we
is
get
such
to
great
decide how
advice.
we feel, right? It's a choice that we make. Do
Ugh,
not embrace the pain. Experience it, let it go, and then just be content and grateful.
that is such awesome advice and such a good way to wind down. Vaughn, please share with the listeners how they can find more of you.
So you can find more of me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook under the handle Yvonne on Tech. And it's Yvonne with an I on Tech. And the website, www.yvonneontech.com, will be launching. And then shortly after that, you can look for me at OM Passion,
Oh.
because that's where I'm going to get to manifest the stuff that we've been talking about now, which is that be who you are spiritual side of yourself, because that's the part that really fires life, right?
Yeah,
So
and gives you
the tech part is toys and fun and cool things, and also some things that we need to think about. But passion is the result of my lived experience.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for coming on the Empowered Half Hour. Listeners, please follow Yvonne because she has so much passion and wisdom, as you can tell from this interview. Yvonne, thanks again for coming on. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Becca, it's a privilege and an honor to be able to share this time with you and with your listeners. Thank you so much.
I'll see you soon.
Take care.